I often get asked, or used to get asked about, like, why did you use the guitar rather than keyboards? Well, you've got to imagine that the era when I started playing guitar, the Beatles and the Stones and the Who, there were no keyboards around, bar Alan Price. So never on my radar playing keyboards. And it was the instrument of the time, I suppose, in a way, and of that kind of era, I think. I started guitar about 7 or 8 at school, prep school. And I formed the Chesters, a school band, of which, a 5-piece band of which only 2 played instruments. That's how it worked in those days. And then...
what did the others do?
They were still in the band. Not you could say you were in a band, that's all that mattered, really. Didn't have to play an instrument. And then... I was a very slow learner with the guitar. Then I went to public school and met Anthony Phillips, who was a very fine guitarist, much further down the road than me. And he kind of brought me on, really. He taught me some chords, some more chords, and kind of early days in the writing sessions with Ant, it was 2 guitars. Ant and myself playing guitars, Tony keyboards, and Pete a bit of keyboards, but more the vocals, really, given the keyboards was Tony's area. And then once we decided to become a band and play our own songs, obviously you had to have a bass player as well, so obviously it was a natural choice for me to play bass and rhythm guitar because Ant was a much better lead guitarist. I didn't really play lead. And to be honest, until Steve left, I didn't play lead because there was no call for it. But in a sense, my sort of rhythm guitar stuff is really what I wrote on. And that's part of the basis of some of the sort of Genesis instrumental sections. Very often you'd have a kind of riff or a groove or something I set up on the guitar, which Tony would solo over, really.
Just going back to the school thing, the first period in Charterhouse, was it seen as was it a kind of symbol of rebellion to you in a way? And I know it got banned in the end.
Well, I feel like I'm quoting my book now. My housemaster, Kenneth Charr, who hated me, felt there was about to be a revolution in the school, started by me, caused by my guitar. So I was banned from playing guitar most of the time at school, which of course is why you want to play guitar. Probably why I'm a guitarist, actually. Anything banned is suddenly attractive. But it was seen, you have to understand that kind of the era of the 60s. There was a new music form coming in, and this big social cultural change that took place because until the 60s, young men, it's a big moment which we tied into, I think, our musical era. Until the 60s, young men wanted to become their fathers. Age 20 or 19, wear the same clothes, do the same thing, and then suddenly in the 60s, anything but their fathers. And that's where it started, really. And so long hair was seen as shocking, and guitars were seen as shocking, and pop music was shocking. And you see photographs now of the Stones, the hair's just about here. And at the time it was like, oh my God, rebels. So it was interesting, in a sense the music was part of the social and cultural change that was going on.
The formation of your early bands at school, you went through the phase with working with Ant and then meeting up with Tony and Peter. Do you recall a kind of gradual maturing during that process to the point where you felt you could play a decent tune and could play properly?
Well, in fact, to be honest, it wasn't until the first album that you really needed to play very well because we were just writing songs in the classroom in the afternoon. And so it wasn't so much about performing on your instrument. It wasn't until the first album with Jonathan King, done on the holidays, the summer holidays, that you then realised that actually you need to play your instrument better than you did. In my case, my guitar playing was adequate and my bass playing was pretty shabby. You hadn't played the songs live, we were just writing songs. So suddenly that first album and then the period after The Cottage was really where you go from being barely off the starting block to becoming something that had to work.
I know this is a well-worn story, and so I don't want to spend too long on the kind of well-known bits, but just give us a sense of when you teamed up with Jonathan King. He was a successful young guy in the music industry, so and a man who had already had a hit. What did this feel like, and was there a sense in which, right, we're going to write hit songs, pop songs?
Well, it wasn't even. There was no plan. Never has been really, but there definitely wasn't then. You know, and a friend of ours, John Alexander, a school friend, John Alexander, put the tape in King's car. I think I'd left school by then, because I think it must have been. I left a year earlier, I think, than Peter did. Actually, I'm not sure. I get muddled. Anyway, he went in his car on a sort of, old Carthusian's day, and he liked it. And saw us and saw Peter and liked Peter's voice and offered to make an album with us. Now, that was a very important time. Nowadays anyone can make an album or a record at home on their laptops. In those days, to get in a studio, age 16, barely 17, pretty unskilled in many ways, and be given 3 whole days to make an album. Seems crazy now, but in those days that was a long time to make an album. It was very important to us, I think, actually. And I think without that, it may never happen, because it made us glimpse of what could be done. It gave us an excitement about where we could be going. And I think and so come the album, you then realise that you hadn't really played together much. You hadn't become a band. We weren't a band, we were just songwriters. And the first album was led by Tony and Peter. Their songs are really what it was based on. Whereas Trespass, I think it was a lot more to do with Ant and myself, or more to do with Ant and myself.
Genesis to Revelation actually isn't a bad album. There's some quite good songs on there. Right? But when you get to Trespass, it's a sea change in the way that the kind of complexity of the music.
Well, I think these things happen in your career, which turn out right. You look back and you think how important it was. To have that 6 months in the cottage, away from London, away from other bands, away from other live shows, gave us that time just to sort of play together and learn and discover what we're going to become. We were like it's like a blank canvas. We had song ideas and we had lyrical ideas and we had music ideas, but no real platform to work from, no real technical pattern. And so in that time, on our own devices, we sort of basically learnt to see what we were going to work at.
How important was Ant in that first phase?
Well, I think Ant is rather forgotten in history. People don't quite realise how important a character he was. I would say he was very much the driving force. Well, by now Peter was getting much stronger in a sense, but he was really the one. The move to the cottage really was to do with him, I think. He was determined to be a musician, and Peter was at film school, Tony at university. I had a chance to go to Edinburgh, but I took time off to do this, and so we were a little bit undecided, but Ant was decided. And I think he was, his drive was very important to us.
And in a sense, then it was a group. There was no designated leader, but in a sense, was he?
No, I wouldn't say that, because the minute you're writing on guitar and keyboards, there's different sounds. No, I wouldn't say he's the leader, but I think his energy got us to the cottage. Without that, we would never have done it. And that at the cottage, people developed some of their characters, like Peter, because he wasn't playing piano, because that was Tony's territory. In the book, I give Tony a hard time, which I think upset him a bit. How, because in a way, think about it, I hadn't really realised until I read some articles that, in fact, you see, Pete would play piano until then, but in the cottage, Tony was a keyboard player, so Pete wasn't really given much time on the keyboard, so he had time on his hands. Whereas we would jam and try and get ideas going apart from lyrical ideas and vocal ideas, he had some time on his hands, so he used that to sort of start becoming, not the manager, but the outside link. He'd ring up the agents, he'd ring up the managers, he'd promote the band a bit.
Did the Trespass album, after the failure of Genesis to Revelation, I suppose you could say it was a failure.
You definitely could say it was a failure.
Trespass album kind of give you a little bit of hope, a bit of confidence. There was something a lot more solid there.
Well, I think, Genesis to Revelation was a summer holiday project. Trespass, we felt we were part of the music business. We were actually involved in the music world. Record label, a studio. We felt professional. And the album, I think, is the one album we've ever done that was played live before we recorded it. So all the songs have been played live quite a lot, which did mean, on reflection, it meant that actually you were locked into your parts. Whereas since then, we've written songs, recorded them first. So when you record them, you're not tied to a part, you're open to ideas. But this one, the songs were all locked into how they were. But it doesn't mean it didn't have another sort of strength because of that.
And then Ant leaves. Did that seem like a very disastrous moment then?
Yeah, I remember driving out with Richard McPhail, who said, "Can we have a word with you?" And I thought, aye, to the pitch at Richmond rugby ground after the sound check. And light was falling, it was a weird atmosphere. And said he wanted to leave, Huge shock to me. And I think, looking back now, I think, why didn't we sort of just go, hang on a minute, discuss it? He'd been ill, glandular fever, was finding stage fright and stage nerves. Why didn't we sort of discuss it and make a plan? But then again, we just got a little bit of a bite. We're just slightly up and running. And I think we probably thought, it may have been correct too, 6 months off, 3 months off, we might have just lost any chance we had to get going. But it does seem strange on reflection that we didn't actually talk about it.
Maybe it was the age. I mean, you were very young, pretty inexperienced. Sharing maybe emotions or deep distress wasn't probably part of the deal.
We didn't do for the next 25 years, really. But that's what it was, and it was a shock. So in a way, when Peter left, shocking though it was, we got through Ant's one, which at the time seemed insurmountable. And so we carried on really, but it was the sad thing is that when someone leaves, like Anthony and Peter, there's a sadness because you'll never be as close again. You stay in touch and you see, but you lose that bond of sharing things that I've had with Tony and Phil for the last way too many years.
I'm going to sort of jump slightly.
No, fine.
Rather than go into the meeting with
Good.
Phil. So, let's just go into the Supper's Ready, which I think you've said that Supper's Ready is probably perhaps your favourite from that period, that first few years. Do you want to talk about that and tell us why?
The one thing about Supper's Ready, which is interesting, is it kind of happened. It kind of fell into place. We didn't sit down and say we're going to write a song this long. The opening part was a wonderful Tony Banks, a Banks guitar piece, and because he doesn't play guitar very much, he chose a shape I would never have chosen because it's just a weird finger movement, but it worked. That's been part of our sort of pattern really. And then the instrumental section at the end, which became a big part of the song, kind of happened one day when it wasn't a plan, just jamming around in 9/8, and I had a riff, dun, 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 and Phil was drumming around the rhythm and across it, and Tony started playing, and then the end section when Peter came back with the vocals, one of those rare moments when we had no idea what was going to go on there. Was it instrumental, was it vocals? We weren't sure really, and he came in and sang this incredibly powerful line, 666 in the end section, and actually it kind of happened before you knew it. Whereas some music sections are a bit laboured. You've got to work at it and push it. This one just sort of seemed to actually just become a wonderful piece without too much effort.
The thing that's very striking about it is there's a kind of emotional content, emotional depth to it, which means that it does have this sort of power. It's kind of.
I feel it's like everyone in the band is at their best. Instrumentally, some of the playing, some of the music, the sections Willow Farm, which is very much Peter's section, you know, and then some of the other sections, which is more myself and Tony. I think all the best bits of what we were doing at that time were in that song. And it's luck too. It held together. You never quite know you join things up, you know. And our the way we work, which is often to join.
Goodness me.
That's not me.
No. Is that you?
No.
Claim that ring.
Sorry, folks.
I think it's me, no.
Yeah, let's just cut for a second.
Yeah. So there you are. Supper's ready. I'm just thinking about that. When you recorded that, when you put it together, am I right that you didn't really at the point you were playing and developing it, you didn't really have a sense of how all these bits fitted together?
No, not at all. It wasn't until we finally put it all together, realised that one section was not quite in the same key. We had to sort of cheat a bit, you know. This is in the days of tuning, so they didn't quite line up. They weren't quite in key, so a semitone out. Yeah, but I mean, I'm a big believer in luck. Something just happened, you know. It's just luck and meant to be, and since then, some of the best songs you've written has happened easily.
And the fact that it's like 22, 23 minutes long, you know, you'd think that was a fairly adventurous thing to be doing, but you weren't daunted by that. I mean, there was no sense in which, hang on, you know, we've got to contain this and keep it down to sort of 7 or 8 minutes.
Well, in those days, there were no real rules, you know. We weren't putting singles out. A lot of bands weren't doing singles, really. There were two worlds. There was singles world, the kind of pop bands, sort of Mud and Pickety Witch and, you know, and that lot. And there was the album bands, and they weren't in the same area at all, so you weren't worrying about length of song. There were no constraints, which is nice. And also the other thing is that, I mean, I said it before, but, you know, no one ever said to us, can we hear what's going on? It was from record labels, you know. We'd handed them the album and that was it. I see so many bands now being, you know, A&R guys going in and listening and giving that 2 pennyworth, and it's tough. I mean, maybe valid sometimes, but we had enough ideas within us to not ever want that.
If you take that sort of period where you said you were all playing at your best, how would you characterize?
Well, I meant that song. You know, that song's an example of where all the bits we were doing all worked well.
And the sense that that you gelled as a team, as a group, were all contributing equally, I would imagine, at that point.
Yeah, I mean, bits always vary, but it's never good to go back and say who did what, because, you know, sometimes some sections are much more one person than another, and that's fair too, you know. That's the way it goes, really.
And how would you, just talk about the individuals a little bit, how would you characterise the contributions? I mean, take Phil as an example.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't writing music per se at this stage, but his input was, like, for example, the 9/8 section, instrumental section, which is a big part of the song, I think, actually, leading to the end, was a jam. You know, and since drum machines, we all play in 4/4. It's dangerous. In those days, you could play around. I think it's in 9/8, but you played around it nicely. You know what I mean? It's sort of so you never quite settled onto where you were, which I liked. And then Tony had this long solo, which is once again adventurous.
Peter himself,
Trying to think.
he comes in with, as you said, he sort of suddenly there's the arrival of this line or two lines of lyric. Was that something that was anticipated when you were playing it?
Well, Peter always caught the mood, but I think what always works is that you have to create a mood that's very special, like the opening section has this eerie feel to it, and suddenly you're in a setting, you know, and it means you're going to lyrically and musically, melodically, you have to be in a certain area that marries that, you know.
And so talking about Peter, the different stages that Peter went through from initially in live and kept playing live, from you know, being the singer without a lot of props to the stage of being quite theatrical and having all the masks and so on. Was that a relatively short period of time, and how much did he kind of discuss this beforehand and lead you into it?
Well, Pete very sensibly didn't discuss it at all with us, actually, because we'd have probably said, "Are you sure?" See, interesting point is what people forget is that because these things are talked about, and the pictures of Pete with the bat wings, they're high points in the set, but they're only a fairly small part of the set. They kind of forget that, you know what I mean? It makes it sound like the whole evening was musical, and he was always wearing clothes, but Bar the Lamb, which is different, it was just a kind of pinnacle at certain moments, like the old man in a musical box. The whole set wasn't like that. Most of it was just Pete playing and singing and banging his bass drum, you know. It's sort of, people tend to think of it as more theatrical than it was, until the Lamb.
What was the impetus for doing this with him? I mean, what was it because there was a lot of hanging about between, you know, whilst you guys were playing?
Well, that's the chat. That's what got going with the chat. That's why he started doing such good chat, really. But no, I mean, I think the concept originally was partly, if I remember, was that you couldn't hear the words in those days because the PA was so crap. Little column speakers, you know, either side of the stage. And so the first thing was the old man, really, and I think that just he's acting out the part of the lyrics. And visually it's very exciting. I mean, it was a great musical section, and I think his performance really enhanced it. It's telling the stories, really.
Remember the first time that he came on as the old man?
No, no, not at all. I mean, I bet no one does, really. We'll see. No, but sometime it was around, you know, it was obviously around that album time, so I don't remember. First show, I can't remember when it was, but it's sort of, my point is I want to get across is that, you know, people, because these have been such highly points, you've seen pictures of all these things, they seem like that was the whole show. It was part of the show, and a great part, you know.
And are you saying that Genesis became known for that?
No, I'm saying more looking back, as history goes on, you end up, there are points you remember a certain album, an era or tour, and there'll be those moments, you know, the bat wings or the old man, and they forget the show's an hour and 3/4 maybe, and that's probably 15 minutes of the whole thing, you know.
It's the sort of photo op moment.
Well, but I'm saying it's how you remember these things, you know what I mean? And I think it's a bit like, I've said before, later on the albums when we started having hit singles, you know, with MTV and videos, a hit single overshadowed the whole album. And people started sort of saying, well, you know, you stopped doing long songs. We never did, really. You know, every album had a sort of 15-minute song on it till the very end. But they're album tracks, and so they went on the television, they went on the radio, but live they were a big part of the set. And so in a sense, those big hits overshadowed, just in terms of media, an album. So their perception was the album was just hit singles, you know.
Yeah, which is totally...
which is fun, but well, you know, albums like Visible Touch had Domino on it, which is I think so, was it Domino? Yeah, great live song, 15 minutes-ish. And then the one with Mama on it had Home by the Sea, you know. So, but people see it through the press, really, in many ways.
In fact, things like Home by the Sea work very well live, to a live audience.
Well, what's interesting is that I'm sure a lot of people came to see us in the 80s, late 80s and 90s in America because of the singles, probably. You know, they were brought in because they'd heard the songs, you know. And but what was good is I always knew the long songs would always grab them. A, they were good songs. B, visually, they were very impressive with the very lights and the staging. So in a sense, I think those who came to see us because of the singles and the short songs and the radio tracks went away with a different impression of us. I'm sure of that, yeah.
It sort of leads on to, I think I have a set, some stupid tops. Fiddle around.
They are.
The thing that I think that a lot of people don't get is that, you know, there's this whole idea that if you love the early Genesis, you're not a fan of the later Genesis. My sense is that you know, that the whole arc of your career, there's a continuity of sound which underpins the whole thing.
Well, I would agree, but I mean, I think have to accept that if you started off on a certain album in the Peter era, that'll be your favourite era probably always, which is how it is. The first album you like a band for is probably always a favourite album, and I understand that. But I mean, I agree. No, I don't see such a huge change as is talked about in a sense. But then again, I suppose it has been in a way lyrically. It's almost a bigger change from the sort of Peter era and the kind of darker stories and the more folky mythology type things that Tony and I used to write. That's probably a big change from that to later on.
Those folky mythology things. What were you trying to do at that point? I mean, were you trying to be folk musicians more than anything, or were you trying to push the envelope on the folk side? Trying to be edgier folk? You
don't have a plan. You know what I mean? You're not ever thinking, let's do this, because you just sort of do what, you're trying to be different. I mean, I'm sure everyone's told us that, you know, when asked about our influences, we always say the Beatles and Motown, which we all share, but you can't hear that, obviously, in the song, but it's there somewhere, you know.
Well, Motown gives you a sort of soul.
Yeah. I think that I think we were just trying to be a bit different. Because the canvas in those days, in the 60s and the 70s, was pretty blank. You know, there weren't that many bands on it. If you're drawing a canvas now, it'd be full up of everything. But in those days, there was sort of a couple of bands like that. There was bits of white in between the bands. You know, you could. There was room to sort of define what you're going to become. It wasn't so obvious what was out there.
Yeah, I mean, you go to a festival in the early 70s and there'd be a huge range of potential performers, you know.
Well, before that, I mean, I remember I went to the Rainbow, it would have been the Rainbow, I think. And the bill was Jimi Hendrix, Engelbert Humperdinck, the Walker Brothers, someone called the Californians, whoever they were. So, but, you know, just Hendrix and Engelbert on the same bill. That's the way it worked then. It was pop music, you know. There weren't such defined categories now.
In your book, you described being in America on I think it was Steve Miller show. Steve Miller, great musician. But on came Peter with the shaved look on his head, and there was a kind of a shock ran through the audience. Is that right? Would you like to tell that story?
Well, it's more that you can see Steve Miller, who is a great guitarist, and it's kind of blues, really. Some great songs. You could see him looking at us and thinking, I think we did Watches of the Sky. You could see him thinking, what the fuck is this? You know what I mean? It's just, he couldn't get it at all, you know. Nor he would, because it's so bizarre, you know, and I think that very English folky thing in America was perceived as something very exciting, you know. It was just so unlike Americans, what was going on. And that kind of sound we were making in America, it was so different to that. They were all full of boogie and rock and roll and kind of blues stuff. So our sound was unique to them. It's kind of why it worked in America, I think. It was just a completely new foreign platform of music, really.
How do you, I mean, looking back now, how do you see the sort of development of the American audience? Because if you go there with that English folky sound, edgier folky, by 74, 75, you've got Lamb, which is has an American subject. It is much more rock sounding, harder. Did people buy into that when they heard it first? Because there was no record out, was there?
No, and that's a prime example of what not to do, is to go on tour with a new album not released and play the entire double album live. Funnily enough, it worked. I think at that stage we were a large cult band, so they were coming to see you because they liked you. They were part of you. They were new. They were sort of part of your fans. It wasn't so much casual people. I guess brought in by word of mouth, but it was. They wanted to like us, but it was quite testing actually. But the show still worked.
So in the initial performances in America of Lamb, was there a kind of curiosity?
Well, no, I think it was so different. I think it was opened in Chicago, I remember actually. I pictured the theatre too, 3,000 seater theatre, and I'm pretty certain that, it was such a multimedia kind of event, the Lamb, with the screens, Pete's costumes, the music. It was just an assault on the senses, I think, and I think for the public it was amazing. They hadn't anything quite like it before, Visually, it was just adventurous, really, and a bit theatrish. And I think, in a sense, that's probably why you always thought maybe there might be some sort of theatrical way of performing it. At some stage, it hasn't been done yet, and it may never be done. But I feel it could become a theatre piece. Maybe not even like London theatres. Maybe a sort of touring theatre piece, But who knows?
In writing The Lamb, I know that there were a lot of problems, obviously, in getting that down. Tony Smith actually talked about how that this was a very tough thing to kind of get through and get out and get on the road with. What was your experience of it?
Well, the house Headley Grange, which was Zeppelin's house, we rented off them, was a funky old place, but it was a nice atmosphere, big sort of front living room you recorded in, well, wrote in really. First of all, double album is more work than you thought. It gave us more time, some of the sort of interesting little jams we had, between the songs and stuff. But I think really kind of overshadowed by kind of Pete leaving in the middle for that William Friedkin thing, which is, I can understand always. And there's a slightly strange feeling when one of the sort of guys you're working with isn't as keen as you are. It makes you feel a little less. It slightly dampens it a bit. And if all five of you we're five then, are kind of into it and excited about it, in the morning. It's a nice feeling, and the chat in between, it's a sort of team thing. You feel off it. But if one person is not so sure about wanting to be there, it does rather it did dampen the atmosphere a bit. But then he sort of left for a bit, and then I think William Friedkin thought, hang on, I don't want to break the band up, and it never quite came to fruition. And he came back, and we finished it off. But it made it funny all round, really.
Can you recall when Peter first discussed the Lamb ideas? Was there a kind of group decision that, okay, we're going to be doing this American subject, double album, concept album, something very...
We'd agreed a double album. We'd agreed a concept album. But it's the one time Peter did all the words himself, bar sort of one song. Maybe it had to be that way, I think, actually. You couldn't have sort of shared the words in the same way, in my mind. I'm sure Banks disagrees, but I think he probably couldn't have done. And I always feel it's part of Pete's decision one of the reasons why he actually moved on after that, because having done a whole album of lyrical ideas like that, to go back to doing a single album and maybe sharing the lyrics is a different, almost a step back, really. I think so. And I think for him, one of the reasons, apart from family reasons and everything else, is something that I'm sure he'd felt he'd sort of got to a point that he sort of moved on, really. I couldn't go back.
I mean, it's kind of interesting that Peter's career then became a series of solo albums, and he's very much known as a solo artist. Whereas you guys, still working, either with Genesis or Mike and the Mechanics in your case, you're still working with other people. It's like,
Well, you must realise, in order to be a solo artist, you have to be a singer. Without that, it's a bit tough, as I found out. And so, but also I did a couple of solo albums, one with another vocalist and one with me singing, which I'll never do again, because you write a good song, you want a great voice. And that great voice isn't me, without doubt. But I find whether I'm less self-contained, I find the act of collaboration the exciting part. I mean, over the years, Banks and I the interaction of playing together, the chordal stuff and his lines overwritten, is a very exciting thing. We'll go into a jam session maybe, and it's a bit like playing tennis. I make a noise and he reacts to my noise. I react to his noise. Then it comes back to me. You're feeding off what the other person is doing. And Phil was drumming or singing, so that's part of the equation. But the middle part of the sound, the chords, which creates the atmosphere in some ways and some of the moods, has always been very much Tony in my role, and we kind of do it together, I think. But it's very improvised, it's very freeform, it's very creative. And on my own, there's no one to play against. That's how I view it. If I play a chord and not something over there, it's a bit, I'm stuck, I feed off a reaction. I need to have that kind of churning of sound, a messing of ideas, sort of melting pot of ideas, and then you react, which is why, the Mechanics has been great to co-write with. I think even if I'd been a singer with a decent voice, I would have always, I think, probably carried on co-writing, because I like that.
there's an interesting point that Tony raised. I think you said that Tony...
Which Tony?
Tony Banks. You said that Tony Banks would never be able to write a hit record. And his response to that, I think, was to say, you're probably right, actually. I mean, initially he sort of said, well, I don't know, but he said, you're probably right.
He said it himself. He's a great... Carry on, yeah, okay. Go on, yes, yeah.
Well, but then he came back and said, I don't... Mike writes great songs, Follow You, Follow Me, etc., hits. And yet when he's with his own band, he doesn't do the writing. And Tony doesn't understand that. And why?
Lyrically. Very simply, I started off in the Mechanics with Chris Neal and B.A. Robertson. A song like All You Need Is a Miracle. That's sort of second hit. I've got the chorus line. I write the words of the chorus, but I get lazy. And I've got other stuff to worry about, getting the drums right, getting the sound right. And so Chris I gave him the chorus lyric, and the first vocal verse line, and he did the rest. So in a sense, another cup of coffee. I had this line, she pours herself another cup of coffee, and that set the mood for the song, but he wrote the rest of it. My brain is busy somewhere else, and also on top of that, B.A. Robertson, who I co-wrote with, is such a strong lyricist. I kind of let him go, really. I'll be involved in that editing, we do them together, but I think there was such strength there. And once again, you're worrying about other stuff. In Genesis, I'm worrying about the guitar and maybe the words in the song. I'm not worrying about the keyboards or the drums. I know that Tony and Phil will do a great job on that. No, listen and comment, but I know they've got that covered. Whereas on a solo album, you've got no one doing quite the same role. So you've got less time to do stuff. And I must admit, I do think it's weird. I've rather lost the habit of writing words. Atlantic Confusion is a song I'm proud of, the words for that. But I need to I might try and address it a bit. Because I don't tend to write and sing anymore. That's where some of the words come, so I should do. But back to Tony Banks and his hit singles, he kind of knows I'm right, actually. He could get lucky, but he just hasn't got the same sort of, I don't mean feel for well, you've got to feel for well, hasn't got the same ear. But that's his strength too, really.
Yeah, he may well say, which I think he has said, which, okay, I'm not aiming to write hit singles as such. I'm trying to do something a little more kind of complicated.
That's his defence. Well, no one tries to write a hit single. You don't try and do it, but sometimes you have to have a sort of a certain, it's not commercial, certain repetition, catchiness. I mean, that sounds a corny phrase, but a certain sort of simplicity. That's the way to put it. And of course, I'm very conscious now what Tony Banks thinks, because having done this book, right, I didn't show him until I finished it. Have you spoken to Tony yet?
Yeah.
The first half, I think, slightly upset him a bit. And the trouble is, and I was trying to be careful, when you write, when I write about Tony, you're writing it from a point of view of sort of with a love and a warmth, because that's how you feel. But when you read it on paper, if you're not quite feeling that, some of my digs, which are meant to be, I'd say it in front of you. Anyone here, I'd say, anyone never met before, I'd wind him up and tease him. But when you put it in a book, it can maybe, a couple of things can look a little bit uncomplimentary, but he can reply with his book. No, it was fine, but I hadn't quite realised, you're saying things with a feeling of sort of warmth and love, and so to you, when you write them and say them, they have a different atmosphere to them.
Yeah, I think he's got past it now.
Oh no, he got past it within 5 minutes. That's the best thing, actually. It took about 5 minutes to have a little rant, and then we carried on. But we'll see.
Now, talking about songwriting, lyric writing, Phil, did it surprise you when Phil started writing songs that became, well, first of all, started writing songs full stop?
Well, the first song he wrote was a solo song, the first complete song. Is that what you mean? A solo album song, or before that, you mean? He wrote...
No, I meant the solo. Well, I meant the songs that, there's a couple on Duke, that little period.
Yeah. Well, that was after the solo album. Well, not really. I didn't really surprise me. I hadn't really thought about it. I was worrying about me, No, I hadn't really thought about it. I mean, but it seemed a very natural thing. I mean, Phil's got a very intuitive way of seeing music. It's sort of, it's never awkward. Tony and I sometimes write things, we're trying to be perhaps too brave sometimes. And when it works, it's very strong. When it fails, it's not so strong. It's not great sometimes. But that's the route we take. Whereas Phil, it'll always be how he once wanted to be. It's always intuitive, and it sort of sits right. And so his solo album, I heard In the Air tonight. That was fantastic. And it's worth mentioning, and I think I might have mentioned it before actually, once again luck. I think had we not been mid-album, Abacab recording in the studio, writing stuff, playing with Hugh Padgham, enjoying it, had we not been in that mode, and had Phil's album came out and just took off, it might have been different, As it was, it surprised him as much as us, I think, and it was great, but we were sort of already geared up to the next project, so it was good timing in a sense. So no, not surprised really, but it's interesting how well he did without Tony and I looking over his shoulder and saying, no, don't do that. It's interesting, the freedom to do how he wanted it,
Yeah, Phil's talked about the freedom side of it. It's like, now you're fully in charge. It's your solo album.
Well, Tony and I are slightly, I use the word chord snobs, but I just mean, something too simple sometimes. He doesn't trust Tony. He feels he's not good enough, but and I'm generalising here. And so, but in a way, Phil's simplicity was part of the strength, really.
the fact that you kept going, that Phil, Phil could do that and then come back, join up with you guys again, and as you said, partly coincidence because you were in the middle of Abacab. And
Well, it did help, yeah. I mean, I do claim actually that we are unique in the fact that I can't think of any other band who's done this solo main band career and run it for many years afterwards, And I'm sure everyone said to you, the reason is because the solo stuff was not caused by dissatisfaction. It was caused by a desire to maybe just explore a wider musical context, really. That the idea you stay in one band forever is slightly odd, really. Look at the jazz world and the folk world, they sort of intermix and intermarry, so to speak, whereas, the rock world was a bit like, and even in those days they would say, you reform the band, I always feel that, we always felt that whatever we were doing was the main thing at the time, the band or solo, but it wasn't like, if you're doing that, you can't do that, And I'm sure it helped us keep going, actually. The variety of work and music was, I think, gave us a freshness as a main band.
so when you first started your first solo album, was that the point where Phil had sort of said, look, I've got to go off?
Yeah, Phil had done, I think, by now we listened, by now we grew up a bit, Tony and I were a bit more grown up. And so we said, unlike when Peter left, and Ant left, there was no discussion. So we said, okay, well, I think our career got to a certain level, you felt you could stop for a bit. We said, okay, well, you go to Canada and sort it out, and we'll do with it from there, because I was very aware that if you want to be in a band, things like location and other people's lives is not a reason not to do it. You can find a way to make it work if you want to be in the band together, if you want to carry it on. And so we had time suddenly. Off I went.
Did you have...
Small Creeps Day. Yeah, Small Creeps Day.
Sorry to interrupt you. But I was going to ask you, did you have the idea in your head? Had you been storing it up for some time?
No. I mean, I read the book and enjoyed the book about the factory, this factory process when you compare life to a factory floor. and the machine, the factory production, the machine goes through this different sections, different parts of the workshop. No, I thought, okay, what am I going to do? Once again, a bit of a blank canvas is quite nice. Who's going to drum? Who's going to? And so Simon Phillips, who I loved his drumming, came on board, and just suddenly had a chance to do something you couldn't normally do within the band. And that was a freshness again, you see. Maybe the reason we've lasted so long is that over all that time period, there've been changes. Ant left, Peter left, Steve left, sort of stuff. That's four big events in a long career, which suddenly bring a freshness to the mothership.
Ant leaving seemed like an absolute disaster, you were saying. But gradually these... we haven't talked about Steve leaving. Steve had become pretty much a fully fledged member of Genesis. Yeah. But there was a strange kind of leaving period, wasn't there?
Well, that's in the book. I sort of looking back, I kind of think, I don't quite know why he left, really. He didn't have to leave, He could have stayed, it would have carried on. It's his choice, but I feel and the way he left was kind of odd too. He just didn't turn up one day, which was kind of slightly strange. Just sort of carried on a bit like, oh, he's not coming. We were mixing a live album, I think, or something. I think it was a live album we were mixing. We just sort of carried on, I suppose what it was, she wanted to do solo work at a point when I think we felt the band hadn't established itself enough to be able to then take a hiatus, a year off. And I think we were correct in that. Had we all stopped then, it would have been hard, I think, to kind of recreate the energy, with the fans stuff, And his first solo album, I enjoyed it. I should play on it. I enjoyed it. But I think it was looking back, I'm not quite sure why we didn't have a chat. Why didn't he say, listen guys, I'm going to join the band, I want to do this, can we work it out, you know? I know he felt frustrated by the amount of his music that got on the album. And I understand that, absolutely, really. But at the same time, I think I do feel, and this is in a funny way, myself and Tony have been writing for a long time, since we were sort of 14, 15. And I think we were sort of further down that path. What Steve wrote was great, but I think he wanted to be able to sort of say, well, we're a four-piece now, and I want to have an equal share of the songs. And I think that's hard to do, because you can't, if they're good, you want them in, you know, but you can't really sort of say it like that. And I think he felt probably a little bit hard done by, in a sense. I think Tony and I shouted louder, probably. Yeah, it seems, looking back, it seems strange. It didn't really have happened. I don't know why. He's the most original guitarist. I mean, he's a fantastic lead guitarist. Hear one of those songs, and absolutely unique, you know. But he did, and so we sort of we then thought about getting someone else in. But I think we felt that the three of us we were so close at that point in time, such a good working unit, that to bring a new person in, I mean, it could have worked, you know, but it wasn't quite so. It wasn't imperative. And so I hadn't played much lead guitar, so I thought, well, I can probably do enough for the next two albums, you know. And I sort of, and I'm still not a great solo player, but I could do enough. A lot of the Genesis songs are written on rhythm guitars, riffs, my sort of parts, you know. That's what I gave to the song. So in a sense, we carried on. It was fine.
I think Tony talked about when you were in the studio, and I think, I don't know if Steve had left at this point or whether he was off doing his solo thing. Hadn't officially left anyway, and it was Volcano was the track.
That's the next album. That before he left. That's Trick of the Tail. But it's an interesting point, actually. I mean, I'm not. What happened was that the first album he wrote without Peter, it was kind of strange that Steve was doing all his solo stuff gone to an album. I remember thinking at the time, you know, we need all the songs we can get, all the ideas we can get. It's a slight drag. I wasn't angry. It was a slight drag that Steve's got done a solo album, so he's short of ideas. And the first 2 or 3 days in the studio in Acton, in the basement as usual, I remember he wasn't there. He was doing, I think, promo for his solo album. And so it was myself, Tony, and Phil. And quite a key moment, you know. I remember just, you go in there and you think, Christ, you know, we're going to be okay, you know. It's never a given at any stage in our career. And the first sort of 2 or 3 days we wrote, Volcano came out, I think basically the first day, which was a nice instrumental moment in 7/8. A bit of Squonk. Not sure what else, but we had some strong stuff before he arrived, so kind of odd, really. But it just happened to turn out that way, you know.
And do you think it's right that kind of gave you the sense of, oh, maybe we can do this as a threesome?
Yeah, I never thought about it at the time, but I suppose it was funny that was a really important moment. You know, had the first 3 days gone badly, who knows? You know, we might have not proceeded. And it seemed ironic or just strange if he wasn't there for that sort of thing. But maybe it cemented the three-piece sort of feeling.
Something that we...
I suppose the other thing actually is that songs like that, you know, Squonk's written on a rhythm guitar riff, like a sort of... And so that's what I do. And the lead stuff is like an arrangement over it, or joins in, you know. I suppose, and the bass pedals are important too, actually, because you know that Volcano do 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 do. If I hadn't been able to play that riff and the pedals as well, we couldn't have done it. You with me? Without a fourth person being there. So the pedals gave me a chance to be the bass player and the rhythm player as well, which was probably, maybe we were 3.5 people. 3.5 piece on that day.
Oh, I just wanted to ask you about the double neck as well, because this is something that a lot of people are going to wonder about. This is something that you developed, you decided, and apparently I understand from Darryl it's incredibly heavy as a result. But tell us about it. Why did you decide to put this together?
Well, what happened was, in the sort of Trespass days, so many songs, so I was ready. It started with an acoustic guitar, and then acoustic guitar and bass pedals, and then a bass, and then a bass pedal, electric guitar. And in that one song, so I was ready, I played about 4 different sort of parts on the record. So live, the only way to do it was to actually have a 12-string and a bass. I couldn't keep going over there, over here, over there. There just wasn't time. And it gave me a chance to sort of do all the parts live that I put on the record. But I mean, the very first one I had done, I remember going into a guitar maker and laying down a nice 12-string Rickenbacker guitar in one piece, a nice 4-string Rickenbacker bass in one piece, kind of crossing them over and saying, just cut that one there and that one there and join them up. And he laughed. He thought, you're kidding, aren't you? Because for us, the guitar maker to sort of get the saw out and go, it must have been painful. I've forgotten the guy's name. He was in Woking, actually. I've forgotten the guy's name. But he did it, and it kind of worked. But it was bloody heavy.
You still play it?
Yeah, I've got a different one now. But yeah, and then I had one for the Lamb, which is a 6-string bass, and always Rickenbacker guitar. And it's there's some great sounds coming out of it, actually. But it's just it's been a bit of a trademark thing. But it gives you that range to, otherwise, like cinema show. The first part of the solo, there is no bass. I'm playing a sort of guitar riff on the 12-string bottom strings. Tony's doing his great solo. Phil's drumming. It's a 3-piece thing. And then at the end, I got a bass. So without that mad changeover, couldn't have done it, because it went from one to the other within half a bar. Gave you more range on stage.
It's quite an exciting thing for an audience that is. It's kind of it's something extra.
It looks interesting. I see someone playing it and I think, this looks interesting. That's my take on it. Yeah.
It brings a lot of focus onto you. Jump ahead. I don't know how much time we've got, and I know you're doing the sound check shortly.
I'm fine till 5, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Abacab interviewed Hugh Padgham the other day. Now, my sense is that this was an important album for the change of sound in a way. And I think you said when we were talking The Farm that it's the first album that made you sound as good as you did when you played live. Is that right?
Yeah, I stick with that in a sense. It's not belittling people like Dave Henschel and John Burns, but it was hard to. Zeppelin got that feel. They recorded in big rooms, in houses. They didn't record in studios very much, especially the drums. Yeah, I mean, I hear those early live tapes, rehearsal tapes or live gig tapes. It always sounded powerful. The drums sounded powerful, and the record, it all went sort of like boop, little sounds, And so Hugh came along, and just Phil sounded like he normally did. We had a sort of bit more power on record, without trying very hard, The sound was there anyway. He just captured it.
There's a great on the Mama, the great sound on there of the drums, and the fact that it kind of has reflects back on Peter's third album.
Well, the live drum sound was a sound that seemed to. Everyone claimed they got it. It's a teamwork. It was Phil. It was Peter. It was Lily White. and Padgham.
Steve Willywhite.
Yeah, of course, they're all there. It just happened, I mean, I think. And Peter was saying no cymbals, so you could go mad. Great sound, you know. And it seemed to come naturally after the drum machine intro, which is always an interesting sound. Mama Starts, you know. It's an example of how I think an American couldn't have done that. I took my Lynn drum machine, put this little drum pattern in, you know, how the song starts, into my amplifier, boogie, and turned up so loud, the thing was just shaking on the ground, you know, jumping up and down. Now, an American, you know, so you take a nice sound and you really fuck it up. Americans find it hard to do that. Sonically, they're too organised, but the English are so lean that way.
But what was it about Mama that made it such a popular? I mean, the sound, the way it's constructed. We were playing it with Hugh the other day, and it just sounds.
Well, I mean, it's, once again, you see, it's one of the nice things about the Fisher Lane Farmer studio. We'd always said we wanted to be able to sort of write and record at the same time, and so some of the stuff on the Mama song came from a longer version, but it came from a jam. You know, and some of the stuff on there was how it happened the first day, you know. We did bits, but it's still, that's an example of like, you're kind of writing and recording at the same time.
The hits that followed, Hugh worked on Abacab, Genesis, and then Visible Touch. Were you aware at the time that there was that you were kind of pushing towards a spare kind of?
Well, Abacab was an example of there was a definite conscious effort to try and actually get a slightly pared down sound, fill it up less. In a sense, the keyboards often, it's easy to fill a sound up with keyboards, and they're still there and they're big, but they're just not. There was more room on the album, sonically. And also, once you got that sound in the studio, it sort of wasn't hard to recreate.
Is there it's a funny thing because Hugh obviously is very excited about the three albums he worked on, but then the dance, We Can't Dance, is almost a step too far for Hugh. It's a strange thing because he can't quite stand the electronic drums on that.
But he didn't like them on when he used to use them. Hugh's great on drums. On Home by the Sea, electronic drums. He didn't like them then. He never liked them. But they served a purpose and they sort of fulfilled a role too, I think.
Which was?
A different feel, something different. And they were there as a new sound, you know. I'm not sure. I mean, Hugh could have done the next album. I'm not sure why he didn't. It would have been the same, really. It wasn't. We sort of found a sound by then in that room. I think maybe Phil had stopped using him, so maybe we just decided it was time for a change. I think, really. But in a sense, Hugh was an engineer producer, where we'd play the song and the sounds. He'd fit them in to make them work. He wasn't a producer who sort of came with ideas about parts, you know. Same as Nick Davis, he's an engineer really, you know, who here's the song, here are the parts, here are the bits, record it well, we'll mix it together, you know, make it sound good. But Hugh's skill was, by making something small, they found a space on the record. I had a Steinberger bass on that album, and that bass sound was very middly and actually very small, but put it in the track. Because it wasn't anywhere else, it sounded huge. Like Peter Gabriel. Peter's music is very good. Sonically, he's got a great ear. He won't overlap sounds too much. He'll find a space for a sound and a sonic thing. So sometimes this thing about, if everything on the album, on the track is big, you hear nothing because there's no room. We've got to define little areas of sonics.